Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Fertility Confidence Podcast. Today, we're talking about plastic, which I think is like a hot button item for so many people in the fertility world, and women. And what we're going to talk about today is also should be men worried about it as well. Anyone who's like interested in hormones and balancing hormones, I think, comes across this concept of BPA and plastics not being great for our hormones. So what we're going to focus on today real quick is a couple of studies in the fertility realm and space and how. Let's actually talk about why. So we can sit here and say plastic is bad, BPA is bad, avoid plastic. We're actually going to talk about some ways that we can decrease our BPA exposure. But I feel like we never really get into the why it matters. So it's important for me when we work with clients that we are helping them to explain the reasoning behind some of the changes they are making. And we do that by helping to show them the research and have these conversations. And for two reasons. One, you should always know why you're doing something. You should always have an understanding as to the why behind it. But understanding the why and knowing that helps you to buy in a little bit deeper. It helps you to be more consistent. It helps you to stay on track with certain changes that might feel hard. And I'm talking beyond plastic here. I'm talking making nutrition changes, taking your supplements, changing some of your habits that aren't serving you right now. If you understand why, it's no longer just an arbitrary, I need to make that change so I can get pregnant. It's now you have a deeper connection to that change as to why it might be impacting you. And it helps us to actually make a relevant clinical decision for you. So we can sit here and say BPA is bad, nobody should be using plastic, but the reality is it's incredibly difficult to be completely BPA free in your life. And if that is something that causes you a lot of stress and worry and anxiety, I want you to understand that it doesn't need to be perfect. You don't need to be perfect to get pregnant. This is like I feel like this is my FCM mantra for 2023 and something that I'm really trying to fuse into our coaching more, fuse into our new content in Fertility Confidence Method is you don't need to be perfect to get pregnant. And the reality is perfectionist or not, you might be really starting to feel that way if it's not working for you, right? And then we start digging deeper and deeper. This is not where we're supposed to go today. Let me backtrack back to plastic. But I really wanted to just kind of like put that asterisk on this conversation around, we're going to talk about plastic. We're going to talk about how it negatively impacts both female and male fertility. But I don't want you to leave listening to this being like, oh my God, I need to get rid of 110% of every single piece of plastic and BPA exposure in my life, or I am never going to get pregnant. That is not true. And the good thing about all environmental toxins and endocrine disrupting chemicals is that it's really a compounded impact over time. And what I mean by that is even if we reduce just 50% of our exposure, we do see levels of BPA, of phthalates, of parabens in the urine decrease. So small incremental changes over time is actually improving that long-term toxic burden. You don't need to be perfect. So let's talk about BPA, okay? So when I say BPA, that is that material that makes plastic malleable, basically. So I cannot remember for the life of me how long ago BPA finally got the no in mainstream media. Everyone was like, BPA is toxic. And all these companies that used plastic packaging had to pivot. And what did they pivot to? BPB and BPC. Now, the tricky part is we now are waiting, right, for that long-term safety data of those forms of BPA. It's still plastic. It's not BPA, but it's still the same chemical compound with slight changes. Is it less reproductively toxic? Maybe, but we don't really know yet. So I always take the kind of approach of like, the BPA free stuff is probably better, but the reality is we actually still don't really fully comprehend it. So it's always good to try to steer clear to the best of our ability. And there will be times in your life where you can't, and that is fine. But let's talk about the why. Let's solidify that understanding of BPA. So we'll start with female fertility. So BPA has the capacity to act like estrogen in the body and increase estrogen in the body. So if you are someone who is already struggling with high estrogen, environmental exposures needs to be a part of your treatment plan. Reducing environmental exposures, not just to BPA, but to parabens and phthalates and the things that are considered EDCs, because they might be, and by might I mean highly likely are, especially if this is a long-term thing, which is for all of us. We've all had long-term exposure to environmental toxins. It is contributing likely. So it's one thing to just start dim and hope that that decreases your estrogen. It's another to actually dig deeper into the root. Let's reduce exposures, not just try to hammer it out of our system and use our liver to detoxify it. Let's actually reduce the burden on our liver a little bit more by looking at exposures. We also know from the literature, women going through IVF who have elevated BPA levels in their urine have a less number of eggs retrieved, have less eggs that are actually fertilized, and less eggs that implant. So there is a correlation between high BPA levels and IVF success. It's another reason why, if you are going that route, the work we do in terms of preparing your body, looking at nutrition, looking at supplements, looking at environmental toxins, of really digging down deep down to the root causes, it becomes so important, because the IVF medications don't just override the issues completely. And we want to make sure, if we're going that route, if we are investing in IVF, we are putting our best foot forward, right? We know that BPA influences the HPA axis, which is basically like our hormonal and stress highway. So our hypothalamic pituitary axis. So things like our cortisol, our LH, our FSH, our gonadotropin releasing hormone, our thyroid, all of these systems, all of these hormonal highways are potentially impacted by BPA. So if you have thyroid issues, if you have hormonal imbalance issues, if you have adrenal issues, we need to look at long-term exposures and we need to reduce that risk. The really interesting part about this, like super interesting part, is that there is research to show that the impact of BPA is actually transgenerational, meaning we see impact of your children and your children's children from your environmental toxin load. This is that whole concept of like epigenetics, right? Preconception care is important for fertility and for you to get pregnant, but what you're doing is actually improving the health of not just your children, but your grandchildren. How cool is that? We also see with women who have higher levels of BPA in their urine or let me actually rephrase that, because I don't want you to think that BPA causes endo or BPA causes PCOS, but we see women with endometriosis and women with PCOS have higher levels of BPA in their urine. So there's a correlation there. It's not a causation. It doesn't mean that because you drank water out of plastic water bottles, that's why you have endometriosis, but it might be contributing to worsening symptoms. It's definitely contributing to hormonal imbalances, and women with PCOS can struggle with elevated estrogen and that unimposed estrogen-progesterone ratio. We know the HPA axis is involved, especially with PCOS, right? Because we can get that inappropriate pulsatile action of GnRH that impacts that LH-FSH ratio and turns off ovulation. Plastics. Like, who would have thought, right? That is female fertility. Now, we all know that I have a super passion about male fertility, and the reason for that is we don't freaking talk about it. Especially as women, it's like, let's get pregnant and start a family. Okay, awesome. And immediately you're like, how do I do this? What do I do? What do I need to take? What should I stop doing? What should I start doing? And you jump into ultimate research mode. And I would say 90% of male counterparts, they're just like, hell yeah, we are about to have a lot of sex and it is going to be so fun. They're not like, should I take a male prenatal vitamin? What supplements should I take? Should I stop drinking? What about this? What about that? How is this impacting? Am I too stressed? Should I work on that? I say 90% because I want to acknowledge that there are some partners out there that do participate in the research and development portion of your TTC journey, right? And as your journey goes on, there's more and more buy-in from our male counterparts. But the reality is men should be caring about this long before you guys start trying to get pregnant. Similar to us, we should be caring about our fertility and preserving our fertility long before we want to have children, but we're not having those conversations at the appropriate time. And I feel like this is a theme on the podcast for the last few weeks of like, we should be having these conversations when we're younger, when we don't care, to prepare us. This is the catalyst, literally, that got me where I am today, because I had these conversations when I was 22 years old. Why? Because I was told I probably wouldn't get pregnant. And my brain went, no, thank you. What do I got to do? I had these conversations at a time that I wasn't trying to get pregnant. I had years. I got pregnant at 27 with my son. I had 5 years to prepare my body. Can you imagine if you had 5 years to prepare your body? And I'm not saying I didn't go out and I didn't have fun. I didn't enjoy my 20s. I didn't drink. I did those things. And I learned and I understood and I honored my hormones better. I actually got down to the root cause of my issues that I had all through my teenage years and early 20s instead of just trying to slap Band-Aids on them, aka the birth control pill. Can you imagine if we thought about these things earlier? Okay, so why should men care? How does plastic impact male fertility? Well, if we know it impacts the HPA highway, the hormonal highway in women, that's not like gender specific. That is across the board, okay? BPA does not discriminate in terms of how it works on hormones. So we have the same impact in men as we do in women. It impacts those upstream hormones, which downstream are going to impact our sperm pathways, spermatogenesis, how men create sperm. What does that mean? Lower concentration, poorer motility, poorer morphology. Across the board, we see in the research lower sperm parameters with higher levels of BPA in the urine. Higher exposures of BPA, lower sperm quantity and quality. What an easy fix if you have low numbers. And I'm not saying that cutting out plastics is going to make your semen analysis perfect, but it is going to have a positive impact over time, right? They actually see germ cell apoptosis. What that means is that the teeny tiny little cells that become sperm die. Higher BPA exposure is actually exploding the cells that the testes need to make sperm. So they're not there to actually be able to become anything. It decreases testosterone, okay? We know that testosterone is the main hormone driving spermatogenesis. If testosterone is low, spermatogenesis is impacted. The body's ability to make sperm is reduced. And testosterone is truly what makes men feel healthy and optimal. It's their drive, it's their motivation, it's their energy, it's their life force hormone. Without it, you can feel very tired and depressed and lethargic and unmotivated. Muscle wasting, inability to put on muscle, weight gain. It's impactful to the whole life, right? If we're looking at whole body care from a male perspective, your testosterone is incredibly important, not just for fertility, but for all of the things, really. Similar to women, it's transgenerational, okay? We actually see, there's a study showing that men who then father males or children with testes, there's a higher risk of testicular cancer when they have higher levels of BPA in their urine. So we're seeing that transgenerational impact. The health of your future children is really important when we're talking about environmental toxicity. It's not just about how do we get pregnant quickly. It's about how do I actually transform my health long-term and the health of my children long-term. We see increased DNA damage. We talked about this a few episodes back about, I can't remember the episode number, maybe 61 or 62, where we talked about how a semen analysis isn't all that you need. And we talked about DNA damage and DNA integrity. So it's not just decreasing count, concentration, motility, morphology, but the actual DNA integrity of the sperm is impacted. What does that mean? Less pregnancies, more miscarriages. We see, there's one study, this is the last one I'll talk about actually. Actually, no, I have a few more. We see with higher use of plastic food containers, a lower volume of semen. We don't have a lot of studies around volume and how that impacts pregnancy and fertility and IVF and all those things. I kind of explain it to my clients that volume is important from an ejaculation standpoint. It's the actual force of ejaculation that gets the sperm to the cervix and to where they need to go. If there's not a lot of volume, that force isn't going to be as impactful. And the sperm might not have a fighting chance to even get to the egg or even get into your uterus if we don't have that ejaculatory force. So volume does play a role. I would love to see more research on volume specifically. We also see a correlation between higher BPA urinary levels and in azoospermic men, so men that have no sperm. So again, I want you all to just take this at face value that having lots of plastic exposure in your life likely did not cause you to have no sperm, but we're seeing a correlation there. So we do have to consider it. And we also see from the research that reducing environmental exposures does improve sperm health. So how do we do that? Okay, let's talk about some really simple ways that we can just start reducing our plastic exposure today. And like I said at the beginning, remember that we don't need to be perfect, okay? And so what I mean by that is one of the big things is plastic water bottles, okay? And this is something that I always, get more and more understanding from the more people that I work with in diverse locations. Because in Ontario, our tap water everyone's tap water is different, okay? We drink our tap water here. Should we be? I'm not really sure. Is that something that we're going to tackle in terms of testing and figuring out? Probably this year at some point. It feels aligned that we will make that decision and figure out what filtration system suits our family. Prior to this, it simply was, our tap water, drinking our filtered, we do filter it, but our basic filtered tap water is better than plastic. The next step to that is no longer drinking our basic filtered tap water, but actually investing in something like a Berkeley filter, a more robust filter system. That's the next step. There's tiers to this experience, right? You don't have to go from I only drink plastic to I don't touch a drop of water unless it comes from a Berkeley filter. You don't need to make that large jump. You just need to slowly but surely find a place that's this feels great for me. This feels like I've made good change. And then we work on other areas of exposure. So water bottles is a really easy thing to start thinking of. Can you swap that out for a glass or a stainless steel bottle? Can you refill a reusable bottle instead of drinking out of multiple plastic bottles? Now, something that I have been asked a lot in FCM is that there's women out there who don't drink their tap water at all, and they only drink those big blue plastic water cooler jugs, right? You can get glass versions of those. You also, if that is better than drinking the tap water, that might be a level of exposure that you actually can't eliminate. And that's okay. Where else can we eliminate that? So I just want you to, the other thing I want to say about this before I move on, because this is important, is let's say you're on a road trip. You're out and about, you're doing something, you're on a road trip. You've drank your whole water bottle. There's nowhere to fill it up. All you can do is pop into the gas station and get a plastic water bottle. I would rather you drink the water than avoid the plastic, because dehydration is also not great for you. Okay. So there's give and take here. There's going to be instances where drinking out of a plastic water bottle makes sense. Actually, for example, with us, when we go up to my cottage, we drink out of plastic water bottles because the only water available is lake water. It would be completely irresponsible of us to drink that and to give that to our children. We would all be very, very ill, right? Could I lug up a bunch of glass containers of filtered water from home? Sure. I would probably never be able to bring enough because I drink a ridiculous amount of water, and so do my kids, but I could. I choose that those weekend exposures through the summer, it's not a big deal. I let that go. It's actually safer for me to do that than to drink the lake water. So there's always going to be instances where you need a little bit of give and take. Okay, so water bottles, food containers. Start swapping out your plastic storage containers for glass. Yes, there's a cost associated with that. No, you don't have to push pause and go up, throw them all out and order $400 worth of containers from Amazon, okay? Just slowly over time, find the ones that are yucky, start picking away and building up your system. Costco is a really great place to do this. They often have Pyrex, like packages for a decent price, and you can really make good, impactful change with that, okay? So swap out those food containers. If you have to use plastic, please do not heat your food up in your plastic containers. If you're someone that brings it to work and pops it in the microwave, please, 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 at the very least, stop heating your food up in the plastic containers. That heat melts microplastics actually in your food, so worsening of that BPA exposure. Pack a plate, pack a bowl, pack something that you can heat that up in the microwave if that's the journey that you need to take for yourself, but please do not heat it up in the plastic. That's like my one big ask. If we can just change that, if that's something that you do consistently, that's going to be really impactful. The next thing to think about is canned foods, okay? Cans are aligned with BPA. There are some companies out there with BPA-free cans, but even when we're grabbing like organic things, like a lot of times those cans aren't BPA-free. Sometimes canned food is necessary, okay? We use canned tomatoes and canned tomato sauce to make the pasta that our children will eat. Am I willing to give those up? Not right now, not necessarily. Do we have canned food every day? No, we don't. But there are instances where canned food is the only or best option for you. Can we find BPA-free cans for you if that's the case? That's something that I want you to consider. Or can we just work to reduce that exposure? Can we swap to frozen options instead and reduce that exposure? Another thing that a lot of people don't consider is receipt paper. So if you are a general consumer, like I truly believe like grabbing the receipt paper and, throw it in the bag and then chucking it in the garbage, which truly I really hope that the world just all switches to digital receipts at some point, because you can't even recycle those. That, is just a small exposure. But if you are a cashier or if you are someone that is literally handling receipts all day long, you are constantly getting that exposure every single time. Every single time. Okay. So we don't need to go crazy and be like, I no longer touch receipts ever. But if you are working in an environment where you are touching receipts a lot, maybe throw a glove on. If you are someone who really just wants to be extra careful, just make sure that maybe start saying, no, thank you, I don't need it. That's what I do. If I legitimately don't need it, I'll say, no, thanks, don't need it. There's some places switching to like, would you like an e-receipt? Like, yes, thank God. Like, why are we still doing this? We've worked so hard to ban straws. And at least here in Ontario, we worked so hard to ban plastic straws. And now we're really in the like plastic bag movement. A lot of stores, everyone's always encouraged, like, bring your reusable bag, right? Which is great. I'm all for it. Even though I'm the one that like literally always forgets, and then I'm like carrying all my stuff out like this. But there's a lot of places here near where I live where now they're like, we legitimately do not have bags anymore. We just don't, which is awesome because it's definitely going to help from an environmental standpoint. And those bags are plastic, right? But now we're starting to see that swap to, would you just like an emailed receipt? Yes, please. Okay. Does it take more time to give your email? Sure. Maybe you can make an easy email that's like, your last name receipts@gmail.com. That's a great idea. I'm actually going to do that. So that you have a nice place to keep them all and it's easy for you to say and spell, right? And it's not, if you have a silly email and you're like, I don't want to give out my email because it's like Princess Cat 45 from when you were 7 or whenever we had computers. Something to think about, okay? So water bottles, food containers, canned food, and receipts. We don't need to ban all 4 of these things in our lives, but how could we, starting today, slowly start to reduce your exposure over time? I really want you to think about that. And I want you to think about it not from just the perspective of your health, but also if you are in a heterosexual relationship, your partner's health as well. Because we know, I actually have more impacts from a male health perspective written in my notes than I do for women. Is that because I focused on that study more and actually read it in greater detail? Maybe. But the reality is we don't talk about this enough from a male fertility standpoint, and it is just as important, okay? So that is it. That is all about plastics. Hopefully that is helpful, and I'll see you guys in the next one.